Hello, I'm Bill Hunt from HREFLang Builder. In this video, we'll try to explain why HREFLang is so complex and how to make it much simpler, or at least figure out some ways that you might be able to deploy it effectively for your site. About 3 years ago, John Mueller from Google actually tweeted that HREFLang is one of the most complex aspects of SEO. That it essentially, feels like a meta tag but gets hard quickly. And it's really the complexity, and we'll talk about what makes it complex in a moment. But it's very interesting that 3 years since this, a number of SEOs have actually posted different places advocating getting rid of it. And interestingly enough, in both of these posts that I captured from the International Search Summit, both on the left they're saying because it's annoying to get right, and on the right, they've had to audit so many bad implementations. So what I want to do is take the next few minutes and really try to explain why this is complex, why it appears to be complex, and then how we might be able to solve this. So just on the record, I personally and professionally believe that HREFLang is embarrassingly simple. It itself is not the problem. It's simply saying I have a page and it has alternates in this language, and this language, and then each of those pages needs to do the same thing, saying I have alternates in language A, language B, and language C. It is that simple. What does cause the complexities is the Frankenstein web architecture that many of us have, and some developers that play fast and loose with some of the coding. And then the third one I didn't put in here because it was too long of a quote, is actually correcting a lot of our errors. So if we talk about these site infrastructure related, let's just dig right in. This is the poster child for complex web architecture. I've shown this a number of times over the past 5 years. This is American Express, and out of 100 plus country websites, they actually use 22 different formats or syntax to indicate a country website. Everything like in this first one, this is .com SAAR, so Arabic Saudi Arabia. Azerbaijan spelled out, Austria as an ISO code as a folder. We're using top-level domains, like in this case for Switzerland, with a language all the way through the gamut. And then we'll have places like Estonia here with saying this is an English language version. Down here we've got an EE version, which is Estonia, not Estonian language. So that's one of the things we'll talk about in a moment. But this is why HREFLang was developed in the first place, is because we have these complex structures, and there is no way for any search engine to understand what country or language, because HREFLang is language centric, but what language and what country or region your content is in. And by setting it, we immediately take the ambiguity out of it, because Google can see this code and say, yeah, that's actually Estonia. Estonian language for Estonia. We've actually seen 187 different formats. So while American Express has tried to leverage 22 of them, we've seen up to 187, and that's exactly one of the first things that makes this complex. Another one is when we're using automation to try to manage our localization. This is an example of a site in Lithuanian. It rolled out originally as English. Then when they came up with their automation method to search and replace the language, they simply added parameters on the URL. So this technically, nothing wrong with this. But what the problem was twofold. When they went to deploy the HREFLang, they basically put the HREFLang tag on every page. So meaning saying this was like this example here, this was my Lithuanian, this is my Spanish for Lithuania. The problem was it didn't work because there was a canonical that said, hey, if you found this Lithuania page, actually we should consider this English page. And so now there's been some videos that sort of said, some older videos that said this works with a canonical to one place. I don't even want to comment on it. It just doesn't work. So ignore them, or if you do happen to see one of them, really listen to what they're saying. There's a very specific nuance where you would do this. In this case, it's absolutely killing them. We confirmed these pages weren't showing up. So this is part of the complexity that is HREFLang. CMS systems, this is exactly why companies like American Express and others have this problem, is they're in between various CMSs around the world. As they move from one to another, URL structures change. It's either easier, or you saw some of those that had default. Nobody's used default as like their homepage in ages. So they're probably still on an older system, just not been prioritized to move. So this is another big one we can attribute why. But the key point here is, as you do any update, try to make sure you adopt as consistent of a structure as possible. The big one after we get site infrastructure is really our products, and it's just a function of we try to make our website match our product portfolio. In this example, Red Slipper, we can see in red all the things that are different by market. So it's very common, whether it be a North American SKU, a European SKU, a Latin American SKU, a market SKU, meaning like between the United States and Canada, let's say there was a different plug, a different electrical system, something would indicate, because that is the actual SKU for that market, it allows them to call up that content from the database, but causes chaos when you try to do HREFLang. In order to make this work, you need some sort of mapping. The fact that there is not a consistent name across markets makes it almost impossible. So in HREFLang Builder, we use a mapping table where we can say that the N28DS is equal to the European number, it's equal to the US number, and that allows us to basically match all these and deploy it. Two more we see quite a bit. The one on the left is where everything is localized and there's not a unique product ID. The only way we can handle this, or anybody can handle this, is some unique code in the page or in the page mapping, or if you're using certain localization tools, will all give a common ID to a page. In this case, it's called base product ID, and we're able to extract that code and say every page that has this page is equal to each other, and we're able to produce the alternates that way. On the right is a little easier, despite all the URLs being localized. We're able to take that ending SKU. And again, as we saw on the previous page, the SKU is different in most markets. That causes a different level of chaos, which requires a different form of mapping. This is another core problem, is how do we map these pages? And you just have to start thinking creatively in how you might do that. Developer-related issues, I'm going to clip through this one fairly quickly. SEMrush did a brilliant study and they analyzed a lot of pages and found 78% of implementations were wrong. We've actually seen it closer to 95%, but since they have brilliant data, I will cite their number. One of these that stands out that should not happen is incorrect ISO codes and syntax. So people are either reversing country language code, and a lot of times this is when you've built this into your CMS, or you've built scripts internally. Nobody took the time to check what the correct ISO country and language is. So you'll see UK, like in this example, top left corner, 45% of the sites that they identified with this problem had ENUK. There is no UK country code. It is GB. So this is wrong. If you just used UK, that's actually Ukrainian language. So big difference between the two. And then you can't do this. So this is what we see a lot where, and I'm couching this as it sounds logical, but let's say you have a Latin America or a LATAM, which is common regional site. A lot of people will try to tag that, as Cloudflare has done, as ESLA. So the developer is thinking, it's Spanish in Latin America, so let me use the LA. The problem with that is LA is actually the country code for Laos. And we often joke about this in the search community about how many we see with this. And this doesn't work because you're essentially saying that this is my Spanish language site specifically for Laos. So obvious problems with that. We see it, and in Cloudflare, just for those that don't believe somebody that manages web infrastructure for a living that this would be the problem, that's actually a Laos. It's in Spanish, and it is for Latin America. Regional sites for Asia Pacific. AP doesn't exist as a country code, so obviously this is a problem. We actually see people put in like EN APAC. There's no regional code. But one thing they did sort of do, which you can, is saying my AP, which, because again, it's a region, but it's not set to a country, is say that it's my Malaysia site, my Philippine site, Vietnam, and Australia. So that is a good application. It's just you can't have the ENAP because that's incorrect. All right, URLs and web hygiene. Why do we need to care about errors? Well, remember, a foundation of HREFLang is we're saying A has alternate B, C, D, and E. And then when Google goes to B, C, D, and E, it's expecting those pages to say that an alternate is A. So again, I have an English language page for the United States that has an Australian version, and I have a UK version, and it's expecting when it goes to both of those pages to find it. But if it can't get to those pages, if it hasn't gotten to those pages, you end up with an error screen like this one in Search Console that says, hey, we did find 7.7 million HREFLang tags. Unfortunately, 580,000 of them, in this case, are missing return tags. A lot of times this happens because it doesn't go to the page. These are sitemaps that it's found the problem with. That means either the URL wasn't in the sitemap, or the sitemap wasn't indexed, or you have different pieces. The fact that there's 30,000 errors tells me that somebody has made some pretty large sitemaps or a series of sitemaps, which means some or all of them weren't being detected. This is an old version of Search Console when Google gave us more data, but it's great for illustrating this point. We had an XML series, an index file that represented over 2 million URLs, 805,000 were indexed. That means if we were using tags in a page, 1.2 million of the pages we were hoping to get indexed to show the relationship hadn't been, and that's why you would get these kinds of errors. And this is, to me, other than the coding errors, is the number one reason why HREFLang fails, is because Google can't see the relationships. Another one is when we use some sort of advanced means, if you will, to create these. So we see a lot of people trying to create these in VLOOKUP. If something gets out of whack, if they try to do an exact match across all markets, you get this problem. Essentially, these guys are just short of 1 million URLs, but 676,000 of them were generating a 504 error. So when Google tried to fetch the page, the server didn't know what the hell was going on. In some cases, you submit this many pages, it overloads it because there might be a little script or something that tries to build something. At the end of the day, they were trying to get 1 million indexed. Only 26,000 were truly very valid. So this wasted significant resources of Google. What do you think the probability that they're going to look at these in the future is? So not only does it affect your HREFLang, but it really slows down how frequently Google's going to visit your site. Because anytime you get a 504 category error, they back off because you're simply saying, I have a problem with my server. So this is a key example of why you need to make sure these are as clean as possible. And even starting small and map a couple core products and work your way backwards. So wrapping up, don't blame HREFLang for being complex. Add the complexity where it belongs, on the site or your structure or the people implementing it. Use uniform structures wherever possible, or one of the methods we talked about for mapping pages. Ensure your developers follow the protocol. Don't try to adopt a code that doesn't exist. And lastly, clean up all the errors and make sure that they're free and as clean as possible. So thank you for taking time. And if you're looking for a way to minimize the complexity of HREFLang, go take a look at HREFLang Builder at hreflangbuilder.com.